Yes, well, really the question should be asked the other way round, because it was corruption, at least in part, which caused the turmoil which we now refer to as the Arab Spring. So when people were in the streets, what were the shouts that we heard most frequently? It was a call for freedom and democratic structures, but it was also down with corruption. So these countries have traditionally had high levels of corruption. The earlier examples shown by the Corruption Perception Index of Transparency International indicated that Egypt and Libya had very low scores. That means very high levels of corruption. Tunisia was slightly higher, but also a very corrupt country. And people felt this, and they took to the streets to really ask for redress for what was happening. And now we can see that they were right, because very large sums of money were siphoned off, both by Mubarak and his associates, by the Gaddafi clan, and indeed by Ben Ali in Tunisia. And we're talking billions, very large percentages of the gross national product of these countries. And the people in the streets, perhaps they didn't know the numbers, but they felt this instinctively, and that's really why the Arab Spring, among other things, took place. Of course, foreign investors who were working on a daily basis in Egypt and in Libya and in Tunisia knew perfectly well that they were dealing on a daily basis with a very corrupt environment. But many of them had important investments. If you think of Libya and the oil and gas resources which are in that country, many of the oil and gas companies had no option but to invest there if they wanted to exploit the oil and gas. And so you really need to look at the other side of the equation, which is, did those companies have adequate anti-bribery and corruption standards to help them deal with demands which were made on them from these very corrupt societies? Did they have proper systems of reporting problems, so whistleblowing lines? Did they have anti-corruption systems in place? Did they monitor them? So all of this was necessary, but what has happened in the short term, of course, is that there has been an exodus of perhaps some of the transitory and non-permanent investments, and now is the challenge to see whether companies will come back and take advantage of the opportunities that there are in these countries for investment. But generally speaking, business does not like corruption, it does not like being in a corrupt environment, because businesses need to plan, and in very corrupt environments, the environment is unpredictable. So if I'm, for instance, in oil and gas, I need to put in investments which will last for 10, 20 years, and in an unpredictable environment, I will not make those kinds of investments. So it's very important for these countries that they also begin to tackle the corruption problem. Well, we have developed a number of tools. The Business Principles for Countering Bribery is a set of principles which companies can really adopt. But just adopting a set of principles is not enough. You then need to implement them in detail in your organization. What does that mean? It means you have to train people, you have to communicate all the time that that's what you stand for. You have to set up a whistleblowing line. You have to then monitor whether what you've implemented is actually working on a day-to-day basis, and report back to senior management. And all of this will not have credibility if it's not driven by senior management, what we call the tone for the top. So individual companies can do a lot, and our experience, even in very corrupt countries, is that courageous companies who really want to stand by their principles can in fact avoid paying bribes, avoid getting caught up in corrupt activities, signing corrupt contracts, employing corrupt agents, and all the other mechanisms which tend to be present in these very corrupt countries. So the actual message is not a negative one, it's actually a positive one, that companies, if they are principled enough, can fight corruption even in very corrupt countries, and the same applies certainly to the countries covered by the Arab Spring.